we'll open up with word of prayer. Hello to everyone who's watching this at a later time. Our recorded version, we're glad you're here too. So let's begin with prayer. Lord, we're thankful for this opportunity to be together and to continue to learn wisdom from the Word of God. We pray that you would open our minds, our hearts, our lives to be your people in all that we do. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Just as a little review, I figured, I use these a lot in Bible studies because whoever did these is just brilliant. That's it. They put together these YouTube videos. They're a group called the Bible Project. And I think it'll be a good review for what we've already done and kind of an intro to what we're going to do to look at their little piece on the book of Proverbs. And I hope everybody can kind of see and hear. I find out. Go to my screen sharing here if I can find it. There it is. All right. And let's see. Here. Please screen share. Please share that. Here we go. All right. So this is their interjection to the book of Proverbs.
Oh, yeah. We haven't seen those in a while. I like those.
Oops, gotta turn it up.
But they're almost all in the centered section of chapter 9. But there is way more going on in the book of Proverbs, especially at the beginning, chapters 1 through 9, and the conclusion, chapters 30 to 32. The book's been designed with an introduction, chapter 1, verses 1 through 9. And it first of all links this book to Solomon. Now remember the story in 1 Kings chapter 3. Solomon had asked God for wisdom to lead well. And so Solomon became known as the wisest man in the world. And we're told in 1 Kings chapter 4 that he wrote
maybe as loud as it can. I'll move it down this way.
Knowledge about plants and animals. So Solomon was like the fountainhead in Israel's wisdom literature. While not all the material in this book is written by him personally, he is where Israel's wisdom tradition began. The introduction says that by reading this book, you too can gain wisdom. Now, wisdom for most of us means knowledge, but the Hebrew word chokhmah means much more than just mental activity. It refers to action also. So think skill or applied knowledge. This is why back in the book of Exodus, chapter 31, it was artists and craftsmen in Israel who were said to have chokhmah. So the purpose of this book is to help you develop a set of practical skills for living well in God's world. And this gets linked with another key idea in the introduction, the fear of the Lord. The fear here is not about terror. It's about a healthy sense of reverence and awe for God and about my place in the universe. It's a moral mindset that recognizes I am not God and that I don't get to make up my own definitions of good and evil and right and wrong. Rather, I need to humble myself before God and embrace God's definition of right and wrong, even when that's inconvenient. Now, this introduction leads us into the first main section of the book, chapters 1 through 9. Which also doesn't contain short one-liner proverbs. Rather, what we find here are 10 speeches from a father to a son about how the son should listen to wisdom and cultivate the fear of the Lord and live accordingly, which means a life of virtue and integrity and generosity, all of which lead to success and peace. The father warns his son also about folly and evil, stupid decisions that will breed selfishness and pride, all leading to ruin and shame. And so the son should make the pursuit of wisdom and the fear of the Lord his highest goal in life. And this way of thinking, it forms the moral logic of this entire book. Now, these speeches from the father also clue us into what biblical wisdom literature is and how it's different from other parts of the Bible. These books explore how to live well in God's world, but wisdom is not the same as law, like what Moses gave Israel at Mount Sinai. And it's not the same as prophecy, divine speech to God's people. Rather, wisdom literature has the accumulated insight of God's people through the generations about how to live in a way that honors God and others. And so, through the book of Proverbs now, these human words about wisdom have been put together as God's word and wisdom to his people, which connects to the other thing you find in chapters 1 through 9. There are 4 poems from Lady Wisdom. Here, wisdom has been poetically personified as a woman who calls out to humanity to pay attention and to seek her. Wisdom says that she is woven into the fabric of the universe. And so wherever you see people making wise decisions, they are relying on her. So you see someone being generous or having sexual integrity or upholding justice. They are drawing on wisdom. These Lady Wisdom poems, they're a creative, poetic way of exploring this idea that we live in God's moral universe, and that goodness and justice are objective realities that we ignore to our own peril. And so fearing the Lord, living wisely, it's living along the grain of the universe. Now together, these two sets of speeches from the Father and Lady Wisdom, they make a powerful claim about this book, that you're not simply reading good advice, you're reading God's own invitation to learn wisdom from previous generations. And so in the next section of the book, chapters 10 through 29, we find hundreds of ancient proverbs, and they apply wisdom and the fear of the Lord to every life topic you could imagine: family, work, neighborhood, friendship, sex, marriage, money, anger, forgiveness, alcohol, debt, everything. And these are all filtered through the value system of Proverbs 1 through 9. Now, these proverbs, they're all pretty short. They're easy to memorize. And actually, this section of the book is meant to become a reference work that you return to time and time again throughout the years, which raises some important issues in learning how to read these proverbs. First of all, proverbs are by nature about probabilities. So if you fear the Lord and you make wise, good choices, things will likely go well for you. And if you don't fear the Lord, you're foolish, your life will likely not go so well. Now, that is all often true, but not always, which leads to the next point. The Proverbs are not promises. They're not formulas for success. So, some Proverbs, for example: the fear of the Lord prolongs your life, but the years of the wicked are cut short. Or, train up a child in the way they should go, and when they're old, they won't turn from it. So yes, fearing God, being a moral person, will most likely lead to a better, longer life, and raising your kids in a stable, loving home does set them up well, but there are no guarantees. Lots of things can and often do go wrong in our world. And so lastly, Proverbs by nature focus on the general rule, but not the exceptions, which are many. And the wisdom books actually aren't ignorant of that. The exceptions are what the other wisdom books, Job and Ecclesiastes,
We are
are
doing
all
Bible
about.
study right now.
And together, these acknowledge that life is too complex for simple formulas, which is why we need all of the wisdom books together to get the bigger picture. This all leads to the final section of the book, two large collections of poems. First, poems from a man named Agur, who begins by acknowledging his own ignorance and folly and his great need for God's wisdom. And then Agur discovers that divine wisdom has been given to him in the scriptures, which teach him how to live well. And so Agur is put before us as like a model reader of the book of Proverbs, somebody who's always open to hearing God's wisdom through this. The final poems are connected to a man named Lemuel. He's a non-Israelite king, and he passes on the wisdom that was given to him by his mom. It's guidance for being a wise and just leader. And then the final poem is an acrostic or an alphabet poem, where each line begins with a new letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And the entire poem's about the woman of noble character. It depicts a woman who lives according to the wisdom of Proverbs and stands like a model of someone who takes God's wisdom and then translates it into practical decisions in everyday life, at work or at home, in her family and in her community. So the book opened with words from a father to a son about listening to Lady Wisdom. And so now the book closes by offering the words of a mother to her son about a woman who lives wisely. The book of Proverbs is for every person in every season of life. It's a guide for living wisely and well in God's good work. And that's what the book of Proverbs is all about.
Boy, I really like those.
Yep, they're really good little short introductions.
And I like the artwork. And
Yep, they make it very, very accessible, which is a nice thing.
30,000 feet.
No, we don't need the Bible from 30,000 feet.
Nope.
So were there any observations, thoughts about that particular little introduction to it all?
It does a good job.
I'm glad they used it as guidelines, but there's no guarantees in
Yeah.
some of the things they said.
It's really important that you hear that reality. Because if you don't read it that way, you read a lot of these proverbs and go, well, that's not true. Where it says, somebody who works really hard will have a good life, and those who are lazy will, suffer under it. Well, that's not always true. It's more about the intent of God is that if we live this way, things will go in a certain direction. But we live in a broken world. We live in a sinful world. So to somehow assume that it's always going to come out that way is just, it's problematic. That's why if you read the book of Deuteronomy has a theology that says good is rewarded and bad is punished. That's the way the world works. But the book of Job says, oh no, that's not the way. Good people suffer all the time. Bad people get away with things all the time. So that overly simplistic idea of good is always rewarded, bad is always punished is not the way the world works. But there is a reality in which those who dwell in God find peace and strength, even when things aren't going bad, while those who don't have God in the difficult times find themselves kind of washed away by that reality. So there is truth in it, but it's not the whole truth. That's why we have so many different books in the Bible, because truth is sometimes wider and broader than any single source can give us. Now, they did point out a problem for us studying the next bunch of chapters in the book of Proverbs. And what is that problem? Because I have to tell you, I'm not exactly sure how to teach the next bunch of chapters in Proverbs. There's no connection to it all. It's hundreds and hundreds of little short assessments. So how do you then, I mean, the way you would really read this, as he said, is this is more of a reference work. So if you're thinking, what do I do about X? I might go to Proverbs and look for the places where they talk about X. But to read it as a single piece is just to keep getting a list of different visions of how we live our life. It's not anything I can, normally I can break down, well, this is the story that's happening. These are the people who are involved. This is what, you might interpret it as. But here, all we have are loose connections. So we have, I'll go through chapter 10. If anybody wants to stop and talk about any one of these at any time, just stop me. And we will stop there and talk about that one. But all you're going to get is a laundry list of different proverbs.
Well, up until this time, the books were history. And they went from the Garden of Eden, and then this one happened, and that one happened. And all of a sudden, whoosh. But it's to the people now.
Mm.
It's not talking history, and it's just vignettes, or it doesn't bother me.
Yeah, and it shouldn't. It's just that to then have like a discussion on how do we discuss. What I'm planning for next time is that we'll read a couple chapters here, and if there are things people are interested in talking about, we'll stop and do that. But for next time, I want you to read like chapter whatever we get to like 20 to like 29, and then you bring in what you want to talk about rather than us just going through the whole book. It's kind of Dick, you look like you have something on the tip of your tongue.
Just trying to put it together.
But when you say that they're between now and 29, I mean, that's 19 chapters, that there's hundreds.
Yep.
of topics. I mean, how can it thoroughly go? Okay, well, I guess what.
I'm just saying that
Yeah.
things that interest you in that, bring in, and we'll talk about the things that interest you rather than reading 19 chapters of loosely connected proverbs that, we can't really talk about their interconnection or anything else. They're all connected, as the person who did the little survey said, in that they are the observed wisdom of generations of how God is at work in the world. So that's what we have here, are generations of people who are passing down these little pieces of wisdom, and inviting us to consider them, basically. So if we pick it up at chapter 10, a wise child makes a glad father, but a foolish child is a mother's grief. Treasures gained by wickedness do not profit, but righteousness delivers from death. The Lord does not let the righteous go hungry, but he thwarts the cravings of the wicked. The Lord does not let the righteous, a slack hand causes poverty, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. A child who gathers in summer is prudent, but a child who sleeps in harvest brings shame. Blessings are on the head of the righteous, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence. The memory of the righteous is a blessing, but the name of the wicked will rot. The wise heart will heed commandments, but a babbling fool will come to ruin. Whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever follows perverse ways will be found out. Whoever winks the eye causes trouble, but the one who rebukes boldly makes peace. The mouth of the righteous is a fountain of life, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence. Hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all offenses. On the lips of one who has understanding, wisdom is found, but a rod is for the back of the one who lacks sense. The wise lay up knowledge, but the babbling of a fool brings ruin near. The wealth of the rich is their fortress. The poverty of the poor is their ruin. The wage of the righteous leads to life, the gain of the wicked to sin. Whoever heeds instruction is on the path to life, but one who rejects a rebuke goes astray. Lying lips conceal hatred, and whoever utters slander is a fool. When words are many, transgression is not lacking, but the prudent are restrained in speech. The tongue of the righteous is choice silver. The mind of the wicked is of little worth. The lips of the righteous feed many, but fools die for lack of sense. The blessing of the Lord makes rich, and he adds no sorrow with it. Doing wrong is like sport to a fool, but wise conduct is pleasure to a person of understanding. What the wicked dread will come upon them, but the desire of the righteous will be granted. When the tempest passes, the wicked are no more, but the righteous are established forever. Like vinegar to the teeth and smoke to the eyes, so are the lazy to their employers. The fear of the Lord prolongs life, but the years of the wicked will be short. The hope of the righteous ends in gladness, but the expectation of the wicked comes to nothing. The way of the Lord is a stronghold for the upright, but destruction for evildoers. The righteous will never be removed, but the wicked will not remain in the land. The mouth of the righteous brings forth wisdom, but the perverse tongue will be cut off. The lips of the righteous know what is acceptable, but the mouth of the wicked, what is perverse. Jackie's shaking her head. Let's.
Yeah.
So in the first half, the beginning of the line is, I'm just gonna say quote unquote, bad people, and the good at the
Mhm.
end. In the second half, it switched,
Mhm.
where it speaks about the good people, of what the people doing good are versus that. Is there a reason for that?
I didn't notice that as a, but there is a, so no, because it switches even in the first part. So the first one is a wise child makes a glad father. So
Okay,
a
the first
good
one, yeah.
child makes a glad father, but a foolish child is a mother's grief. So
Right,
there's the
okay,
comparison.
But after that,
Then it's treasure gained by wickedness do not profit, but righteous delivers from death. But then it goes back again. The Lord does not let the righteous go hungry,
That's
So
what I
again-
object to.
but he thwarts the cravings of the wicked.
okay,
You object to it because
Because there's too much hunger in the world, and it's happening to good people.
but remember what he said. It's about probabilities rather than actualities.
Yeah, okay,
Because God's intention would be that the Lord does not want the righteous to go hungry. In fact, God doesn't want anybody to go hungry. But we as people have created a situation in which brokenness has entered the world and people do go hungry. I mean, even today, if you were to consult like a lot of the statistics that they have in Bread for the World, they say there's plenty of food to feed everybody.
yeah.
It's not that we don't have enough to feed the world. It's that we have a system that keeps many people from getting what they need to survive. So the problem's not with God providing abundantly. It's with how we then take those resources and use them for, 20% of the people have 80% of the resources in the world. That's kind of not the way God intends.
Well, the deal is when we do bring the food to the countries,
Mm.
It's stolen.
Yep.
And we pay off, and the government people come in and,
Right.
flee.
Right. Yeah, on all levels, there's this sense of brokenness. I mean,
Yeah.
certainly we try to help people, elements in that country take things, but there's also the sense that we help the people we like, but we don't help the people we don't like, because that's the way the world works. So at every level, there's this kind of sense of, but what Proverbs is saying is that if God's will was really fully in charge here in the world, the reality would be that those who are a part of the will of God would always have what they need. But that's not the way it is. And you're right. We read these things sometimes we go, not exactly sure how that's helpful advice.
Or how it applies in our day and age.
Yeah, or how it applies today, when we know that, so there is that. You did catch, though, Diane, something that's important, and I did want to at least cover this. I'll look in here for the notes I made about all this. There are different kinds of comparisons that go on now from chapter 10 through chapter 29 in these two sentence sort of proverbs. There are various kinds of comparisons that are going on. First of all, there are what you're talking about, the antithetical sort of comparison. So the good are like this, the bad are like this. So you're comparing these opposites almost in some way. So a wise son brings joy to his father. A foolish son is a mother's bane. That's a comparison, an antithetical comparison of one to the other. But not all of them are like that. Did you notice that as we were reading them? Some of them are just, the thought is too long for one line, so they just carry it out further. So it just becomes a longer thing on the same sort of understanding. So a strong man who trusts in the fear of the Lord will be a refuge for his son. There's no comparison there. It's just, okay, we couldn't fit it all into one line, so let's go to line 2 to finish out the thought. So it's all kind of a continuous sentence. Some are like that. Not any really in the section we just read, but there are quite a few that have, as we go through the whole thing, that are a part of that. Some are kind of synonymous parallels. So you say the same thing in the second line that you said in the first line, you just say it in a different way. So there are some like that, I think, in here. Let me see if I can pick one out for you so you get that idea. See. Okay, so lying lips conceal hatred. This is verse 18. And whoever utters slander is a fool. In some ways, they're saying essentially the same thing. You just have kind of a continuation of the same thought restated a second time.
But slander can be more than lying.
Yeah.
It can be
Yeah.
other actions as well.
Right. But they're using concepts that are similar. So it's just, in some ways, a repetition of the same reality. So someone who lies is going to cause destruction. That's just the way it is. And so they tell you the same thing. Someone who lies about other people, which is slander, is going to, bring about foolish ends by what they do. So there's kind of just this restatement. And sometimes comparisons that are made, not everything is seen in terms of black and white. As you read through this, you sometimes get the feeling that, well, they have this is this, this is that. It's just, this clear distinction. But that's not always the case in what they're saying. Sometimes you compare things, but not so much with a value judgment of what is good and what is bad. Again, I don't think there's any in this section, but in the next chapter, there's one that says, like a gold ring and a pig's snout is a beautiful woman without good sense. Though that's one of the ones I hate probably the most in Proverbs, is that's kind of a sexist, terrible sort of thing. But there's not any moral value judgment about that. It's just kind of a observation. Or also in the next chapter, if the righteous in the land get their deserts, how much more the wicked man and the sinner? So everybody's going to get their deserts. I mean, maybe there's an intensity about one. And then there's a few that are statements and explanations. So the first line states something, and then the second line explains what's going on. So in chapter 20, we have a king's threat is like a lion's roar. Now, if you heard that, what does that mean?
Danger.
They explain it in the next line, which is, one who ignores it is his own worst enemy. So if you hear the lion roar, you run, do something. Don't just stand there and wait to get eaten. Well, it's the same thing with the king. If the king's yelling at you, you probably want to take some action. Ignoring it is not a very good thing. So you have that kind of, explanation that goes on. So there are a few different structures in these too. They're not all comparisons, because there are so many comparisons, you can kind of get into the sense, well, they're all comparisons. No, they're not all comparisons. They're not all good and then bad. There is this kind of mixing of things going on. Hi, Pastor John. We see you in, so we're glad you're here. Pastor John's been trying to join us in the past, so he's here with us. I don't know if he can send anything, or hopefully he's hearing us right now.
Oh, mercy. Oh, welcome.
So we welcome you. So anything else that you in that, were there any that particularly jumped out at you? Any other than Jackie's right? That one jumped out at me at first when I read it too, that, well, that's not always the case.
According to the study Bible, all of it isn't written by the same author.
No, it's not. We attribute this, historically it's all been attributed to Solomon, but it's not necessarily Solomon who writes all these. It's probably more what somebody did was take a collection of the generational wisdom of Israel and brought it all together and said, okay, we'll put it all in this book. And it will be there for people to go on. So that's a good point. Yeah, it's not all written by the same person there. We can't even be sure what time period all these are from. This could be from a pretty wide range of time too. Anything from the original monarchy through the exile. You probably have things all along there that are part of this book. Now, I'm particularly interested in the next one in chapter 11. Because this wisdom also is a part of really what's a part of our prophetic tradition. It kind of carries that forward some. 11:1 says, a false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but an accurate weight is his delight. Now,
What's a false balance?
very good. That's what I was going to ask. If anybody knew what a false balance was.
But like in
It's
the,
just some,
Yep, that's basically
Here, yeah.
almost perfectly stated.
Yeah.
The merchant puts their thumb or uses a fake weight
Yeah,
so that you're actually giving people less for their money than they deserve. And the prophets were constantly kind of about this reality, that what's happening where merchants were essentially cheating the people. They were getting more than they should for their products. And what that did was it deprived God's people the things they needed for their life. And certainly this kind of understanding is as pointed at us today as it was then, that, people need to have that which they need to survive. And when we make it beyond their means to do that, especially when it's hugely beyond their means to do it, and we do it at their expense so that we can have more, there's something wrong with that. And we have to take that into account. So again, we'll kind of just go through chapter 11. If you want to stop me, because I think there are lots of interesting little things that are held up within the book of Proverbs, but because they're so diverse, I can't say, let's pull all these together and look at this one, because there's some very different sorts of ideas here. When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but wisdom is with the humble. The integrity of the upright guides them, but the crookedness of the treacherous destroys them. Riches do not profit in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death. The righteousness of the blameless keeps their way straight, but the wicked fall by their own wickedness. The righteousness of the upright saves them, but the treacherous are taken captive by their schemes. When the wicked die, their hope perishes, when the expectation of the godless comes to nothing. The righteous are delivered from trouble, and the wicked get into it instead. With their mouths, the godless would destroy their neighbors, but by knowledge, the righteous are delivered. When it goes well with the righteous, the city rejoices. When the wicked perish, there is jubilation. That's when I have a little trouble. So we rejoice when the wicked perish. Yes, we do, but should we? I mean, there's
It's your image of what's wicked.
Yeah, that's part of it. But even when, I guess a story that comes to my mind right away is I remember, must be 4 or 5 years ago now, there was someone down in Florida who was being executed, murderer. And of course, we want to see people protected from such people. But they were executing the person, and people were out in the streets having parties. Now, certainly we may, for the protection of others, need to do these things, but I don't know about celebrating that as something, I would do it with a sense of extreme grief that we have to, this is what we have to do to protect people is a sad thing. It's not something to have a party about, but so that one really kind of threw me when I read it. By the blessing of the upright, a city is exalted, but it is overthrown by the mouth of the wicked. Whoever belittles another lacks sense, but an intelligent person remains silent. The gossip goes about telling secrets, but one who is trustworthy in spirit keeps a confidence. Where there is no guidance, a nation falls. But in an abundance of counselors, there is safety. To guarantee loans for a stranger brings trouble, but there is safety in refusing to do so. Gracious woman gets honor, but she who hates virtue is covered with shame. The timid becomes destitute, but the aggressive gains riches. There's another one that I'm not aggressive. What does aggressive mean? Those who are kind reward themselves, but the cruel do themselves harm. Wicked earn no real gain, but those who sow righteousness get a true reward. Whoever is steadfast in righteousness will live, but whoever pursues evil will die. Crooked minds are an abomination to the Lord, but those of blameless ways are his delight. Be assured the wicked will not go unpunished, but those who are righteous will escape. Like a gold ring and a pig's snout is a beautiful woman without good sense. I've already told you that one is not among my favorite of the proverb. The desire of the righteous ends only in good, the expectation of the wicked in wrath. Some give freely, yet grow all the richer. Others withhold what is due and only suffer want. A generous person will be enriched, and one who gives water will get water. People curse those who hold back grain, but a blessing is on the head of those who sell it. So in here, they're talking about someone who just just keep it for me and my family. Even though we have plenty and we don't need everything we've got, I'm just going to hang on to it all rather than righteously selling it to people who desperately need the food that they have. Whoever diligently seeks good seeks favor, but evil comes to the one who searches for it. Those who trust in their riches will wither, but the righteous will flourish like green leaves. Those who trouble their households will inherit wind, and the fool will be servant to the wise. The fruit of the righteous is a tree of life, but violence takes lives away. The righteous are rapid on earth. How much more the wicked and the sinner are repaid on earth? How much more the wicked and the sinner? So anything jump out in this bunch of?
Yeah, the number of times that the good was, it seemed almost perfect.
Mhm.
And none of us are perfect.
Yeah.
So, sometimes I'm the first sentence and sometimes I'm the second.
And so it is in the world.
Should we go over it? And see which ones are good and which
Everybody take a
ones aren't?
test. But you're right. We are reflected in both ends of almost every one of these in some sense. I mean, in some sense, we're struggling with becoming that which God calls us to.
It seems like perfection.
Yeah.
And because of sin, we can't.
But I think what hello.
Is this the man?
Hello.
Praise the
Welcome.
Lord, Pastor Bear.
John?
Yeah,
Welcome.
that's John.
Thank
Oh, we're glad to have you.
you. Yeah, it's my pleasure.
But yeah, I think what Proverbs is kind of trying to lay out for us is that the universe has a moral order to it. Now we may struggle with that concept, but that's the concept behind what the writer of the book of Proverbs says, is that there is a moral order to the universe. And what's reflected in the Proverbs that are offered is this vision of what the moral order actually is.
What it's striving for.
Yeah. What's God's intention for the world? So you're right. Do we live up to that intention? No, none of us actually live up to that intention, no matter how hard we try. But the person is laying out that this is the reality God desired for the world.
It should be our goal.
It should be our goal. It should be our vision of reality. Dick, what were you gonna?
Well, yeah, you think back on the biblical stories, David, Paul, and their history, and that was all conformed with this.
No, even the best.
You can hear.
Can you hear us all right? Can you hear us all right? Okay.
I can hear you. Yeah, I'm just listening at your scripture.
Yeah, I think Dick's right that even within the history of
You speak very
Israel,
softly.
even within the history of Israel, people don't conform to this reality. I mean, even the best of the figures in Israel's history don't live up to this. But most of them, if we look at their lives carefully, for the most part, recognize even when they fail in that. So David, you're right. David is a totally imperfect king within history. And yet David also recognizes his imperfection. He recognizes his brokenness before God and seeks forgiveness and a new start from God. So that's, again, this becomes kind of a mirror for us to examine our own lives. And someone else said it well, too, that some of the things that are in here are also grounded in the context of that time. So we have to realize that part of what's here is also time bound. It's not universally always seen in the same light. When we get to the picture of a good woman in chapter 31, well, there are some parts of that I might go, well, that she's passive and always does what her husband says and all these other things, that was their understanding back in,
Times change.
yeah, times change. But we can also reflect on the realities of sometimes we can make the parallel in our own day. So we don't have false balances really in our world anymore. There's not usually someone who's taking a little balance and switching it around so that it's fake. But we do have people who inflate prices far beyond what they're really worth. And by doing so, deprive people of their opportunity to be able to participate in what's necessary for life. And we know that that's true. And we know the destructiveness of that reality. So even though the structure of what's being said is grounded in the time period it's in. It still speaks to our reality in its own way as we think about it. Let's again move a little farther and look at chapter 12 then. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but those who hate to be rebuked are stupid. It seems a little strong for me, but okay. The good obtain favor from the Lord, but those who devise evil he condemns. No one finds security by wickedness, but the root of the righteous will never be moved. A good wife is the crown of her husband, but she who brings shame is like rottenness in his bones. The thoughts of the righteous are just. The advice of the wicked is treacherous. The words of the wicked are a deadly ambush, but the speech of the upright deliver them. The wicked are overthrown and are no more, but the house of the righteous will stand. One is commended for good sense, but a perverse mind is despised. Better to be despised and have a servant than to be self-important and lack food. I'm not exactly sure what we're getting at in that one. I have to look back in my notes. That one seems a little obscure to me. The righteous know the needs of their animals, but the mercy of the wicked is cruel. Those who till their land will have plenty of food, but those who follow worthless pursuits have no sense. The wicked covered the proceeds of wickedness, but the root of the righteous bears fruit. The evil are ensnared by the transgressions of their lips, but the righteous escape from trouble. From the fruit of the mouth one is filled with good things, and manual labor has its reward. Fools think their own way is right, but the wise listen to advice. Fools show their anger at once, but the prudent ignore an insult. Whoever speaks the truth gives honest evidence, but a false witness speaks deceitfully. Rash words are like sword thrusts, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. Truthful lips endure forever, but a lying tongue lasts only a moment. Deceit is in the mind of those who plan evil, but those who counsel peace have joy. No harm happens to the righteous, but the wicked are filled with trouble. Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who act faithfully are his delight. One who is clever conceals knowledge, but the mind of a fool broadcasts folly. The hand of the diligent will rule, while the lazy will be put to forced labor. Anxiety weighs down the human heart, but a good word cheers it up. The righteous gives good advice to friends, but the way of the wicked leads astray. The lazy do not roast their game, but the diligent obtain precious wealth. In the path of righteousness there is life, and walking its path there is no death. Sorry, pages sticking together. And that's the end of that chapter anyway. So, thoughts on this particular set of Proverbs?
Well, it's pretty much as follows the rest of it,
Okay.
you know, the good are good, the bad are bad.
Yep.
And the bad will suffer and the good will increase.
Yep. Are there general characteristics though that are beginning to emerge that define what is good and what is evil?
There's no middle road. You know, it's either you're really good or you're really bad. And sometimes there's, you know, you walk a middle path.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a good observation.
Yeah. And yet we ourselves sometimes recognize the difficulty of walking the middle path. What's the proverb in our day? The person who walks down the middle of the road gets hit by a car.
what is it, the surest way for evil to thrive is for the good man to say nothing.
Yep. So you're right. In some ways we see the world as very complicated reality, and it is. I mean, I am constantly trying to figure out justice issues in the world, and that at one level, they're very complicated. How we got there, where we are now, it's all incredibly complicated. But there is trying to think of the best way to say this. There is a level of reality in which you do have to choose, though. You can't sit the fence. So if we perceive people being treated unjustly in the world, and we do nothing about it, then aren't we as much a part of the problem as the people who are actually perpetrating? We might say we're trying to walk some middle ground, but the truth is, while it's going on, you either are here or you're here. You can't walk the middle ground. There are issues that are more nuanced that we can deal with. But ultimately, a lot of life is about eventually having to choose how we're going to move forward on that. Are we probably the place where we perceive the most difficulty is, do I live for myself, my family, take care of them, or do I worry about people out here who may be in need? And do I then risk the reality I have that's my family, my people, my whatever, to help people who I might not even know? Because there is a certain amount of risk that goes with that. And yet, here in Proverbs, what's highlighted, I think, are some of the characteristics that make for righteous people. And those what characteristics would you pull out just from what we've read so far in Proverbs?
But every person is not going to think the same characteristics are good.
And yet, they're pretty consistent here in Proverbs, I would argue.
Having the wisdom to choose the right path.
Okay, wisdom, but wisdom gets defined as some very specific things in this book. Obviously, the most important is chapter 1. The wise is someone who fears the Lord. So, a characteristic of a wise person to this person is someone who's always in tune with the reality that this is God's world. It's not my world. It's not anybody else's world. This is God's world. And if I'm going to be a person who is wise, a person who finds what real life is, then somehow I have to try to struggle to be in tune with God's reality. That's at the center of everything I do. So if we're in tune with God's reality, then the person would go on to argue, then the characteristics that define someone who is wise are the same characteristics that define who God is. So, what are those characteristics?
God doesn't treat each one with the same characteristics, the same.
I would argue that there are some characteristics we would all agree God is about. God is.
Finally, yes.
Yeah.
But in life.
Yeah, in life we might. But even here, the person says that what characterizes God is love.
Justice.
So a person who is wise is a person who lives by love. That's just, wisdom always includes that reality. And the person's not just talking about love as kind of this gushy feeling we have, which is how we tend to talk about love in the American culture for some reason. We get caught up in that idea. But that love is about faithfulness, trustworthiness, that you can count on the things that God says. When God says something, then God does those things. When God establishes a relationship, God is true to that relationship. That's who God is. And the book of Proverbs says a wise person is a person like that too, who is trustworthy and faithful in the relationships they live in. That's always what wisdom. And if you look through the book, you'll see that all of the little sayings they have tie to that reality, that a person who is wise is trustworthy, faithful. A person who is wise is someone who is generous. Almost every little thing where it makes a contrast between the wise and the wicked. The wise are people who share what they have, are honest in how they treat other people with the things that they have. They don't hoard for themselves. They know that others in the world need these things. And so they, in the same way that God is generous to us, God does not withhold from us. God says, here, I know you need these things for life. So here they are. And that a wise person mirrors God's generosity in the life that they live. That's what being wise is about. You realize that generosity is important. A wise person tries to build other people up rather than tear them down. So the wise are constantly saying things to people to comfort them, to be it. And when they have something mean that they want to say, what do? They shut up. So you have that, you have all these sayings about the wise don't boast about their intellect. The wise instead just, the foolish person is just saying whatever they want to say. The wise person knows the best words to speak to lift someone up in the same way that God does that with us. So you can begin, in some ways there are, so many things that are said in this book, but there are some common characteristics that constantly play out in what the writer of Proverbs brings to us. Hard work is something that, always seems to be what wise people are about. They do their best. They're offering all that they are, which is what we say God really does too. God's willing to come down here and die on a cross so that we might have life. God doesn't withhold God's self. God doesn't lay back and wait for something to happen. God acts. And God acts in a kind of self-sacrificial sort of way, as do the wise within the book of Proverbs. So we can begin to, as we take all these together, if we wanted to, we begin to put together this image of what it means to be a wise person in the world. And as Jackie has put it, and is absolutely true, we'd never get there. No matter how hard we try, we're not going to become the pinnacle of wisdom. Why do you think that the writer of this book, when talks about wisdom, he doesn't use a real person to say, now this is how wisdom's personified? He's got to create Lady Wisdom to give us the picture, because there's nobody who you can point to and say, there's the wise person.
Yeah.
But we can begin to get a picture of what, a vision of how to move our lives. And that's what the book is kind of giving us, is that vision. We're about at the end of our time. So for next time, what I'd ask you to do is read on. Oh, Dick, why don't you get
Question on the author
Mhm.
on this. What did he base his experiences on? His writings?
If I was to, and one of the difficult things about biblical studies is, in some ways, the construction of books or whatever we have is lost in the corridors of time. All we can do is put together a probable way this happened. And the way that Proverbs seemed to come into being is that someone just began to collect all of the wise sayings that were out there.
So it's not one person
No.
that has
Because
put
if
this
these-
book together.
If these were original, well, that puts another light on
Yeah.
things. So,
Well, probably they're probably all original in some sense, in that somebody somewhere came up with them.
mhm.
But what happened was probably that at some point in time, someone in Israel began to collect the wisdom, not just of Israel, because we can see in these Proverbs wisdom that also comes from Egypt, from Mesopotamia, from other surrounding countries, that this person took this wisdom and funneled it through their understanding of God. What is God about? That fear of God that's really at the beginning of the book. They took all this wisdom, funneled it through that, and then put it together that way. So it's not that they kind of like sat down and wrote hundreds of really wise things to say. They just went out and found a lot of wise things that people said, and then they took the ones that seemed consistent with their understanding of God as a Jew. And put them all together for the use of, and I think the person who did our little video thing really was very good in saying that it was meant to be more of a, a reference guide. So if you're trying to figure out, what do I do with X and X? Well, I could go here and look up, what does this person say is a good way to approach that particular issue in my life. It really probably as a whole wasn't meant just to sit down and say, okay, I'm going to start on page 1, read to the last page. That, it's much more like an encyclopedia. I did know one young lady who, when I was babysitting, who read the encyclopedia like straight through. But I know when I used the encyclopedia, what I did was I went there and looked up what I wanted to know, and I didn't read the rest of the encyclopedia. I think that's mostly how we see that probably people use the book of Proverbs. It wasn't meant to be like, okay, today I'm going to sit down and I'm going to read the book of Proverbs. Instead, they would say, well, I'm struggling with what I do as a wealthy person. How do I use my wealth? Well, let's go see what Proverbs has to say about what wealthy people ought to do. And you would look up, the verses that have to do that. Or, how do I use my time? Well, Proverbs probably has some stuff about that. So let's go take a look and see what what it says about that. And so we're kind of approaching it in a little strange sort of fashion, because
We're getting it all at one time.
right.
Now, next week, you want us to read?
I want you to
So-
read up to like chapter 29 from here, and you bring in the ones you want to talk about, ones that touched your life, ones that really had meaning for you, ones that maybe you went, huh?
There are a few.
There are a few, and we'll talk about those, and that will be the guide for our discussion then, of the things that are important to you. And John, you as well can bring some ones you want to talk about, and we'll be happy to do that.
Yeah, I will do
Alright.
that. Thank you. I love the sense of humor you had. So just one thing brought me here. I just want to read the scripture as a fellowship. Okay,
Yeah.
it's from Job 23:12. I have not departed from the command of his lips. I have treasured the words of his mouth more than my daily bread. So actually, this is a time I need to sleep. I know that,
Okay,
but I have considered it's my privilege. Actually, I have been waiting from many days to join you. Pastor Dave, you remember I just called you a couple of times.
Yep.
Even now, I struggle to come here, but I called to the office, and it's nothing but God's appointment, or else I'm from other side of the world. But how come I could able to get this Trinity Lutheran Church website, and where I can see the Zoom link, and I was connected. It's like God works in a mysterious ways. I love to be in this fellowship.
Yes.
Yeah, Pastor, I like your spirit, a sense of humor. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
God
Rejoice in
has
the
done
Lord.
wonderful things, and I think we have to see it with joy.
And you are welcome to
Yeah.
join in with any comments.
Yes.
If you come back,
sure.
please join in.
Yeah.
Yep.
I love to. I set my time, and I will love to do that. Okay, that's anytime we can sleep, but we don't get this kind of chances where we can have a good insights. You are just having a lot of experience. I think you are more than my age. Your experienced man. It's been a blessing to me to be in the ministry field where, as you know, India is struggling a lot even now with this pandemic. For the past 1.5 years, we don't have regular Sunday services. We're struggling a lot. So we need your prayers. So God only joined us here. We love to have you all. Thank you, Pastor. When is our next Zoom?
Next Tuesday at the same time, 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock
Okay.
our time.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Well, thank you
Thank
for
you.
joining us. It is a great pleasure.
Thank you. Love to have you. Praise the Lord.
Well, God bless everyone. We will see you next week.
Thank you.
Praise the Lord.